Do you feel overloaded at all? A little overtasked? Well, if so, you are certainly not alone. Unfortunately, that's become the new normal. And today I have the great Juliet Funt back on the show, and she's going to share with us how she's helping the military combat task saturation and overload. I think you're going to walk away with some practical tools to bring more sanity to your workplace. Let's dive in. Well, hello, I'm Cal, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast, a place to be refreshed, renewed, and encouraged as you lead yourself, your family, and your team. I'm really excited to have Juliet Funt back on the show. She's the author of A Minute to Think, which is a book that's spreading like wildfire in the military and in the public sectors. She's an evangelist for freeing the potential of companies by unburdening their talent from busy work. Doesn't that sound good? And she has brought her powerful concepts to Spotify, National Geographic, Vans, Costco, Pepsi, Nike, ESPN, and the list just goes on and on. I've been a huge fan of her work since I first discovered her about 5 years ago. And I'm really excited to now see that her work is taking off in the military and helping us become more productive and eliminate unnecessary tasks. On this episode, we discuss how she is helping the military combat task saturation. We talk about her observations of the military as someone who has worked in the private sector for 20 plus years. We talk about the benefits and the challenges of flat comms, how to actually disconnect when you're on vacation, and a lot more. I always enjoy and learn a ton when I have Juliet on the show, and I think you're really going to benefit from her wisdom today. So please subscribe to the podcast, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can also leave a comment now on Spotify. This is a brand new feature. Be the first person to comment. Of course, you can comment if you're watching this episode on YouTube. So without any further ado, please enjoy this conversation with the great Juliet Funt. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official policy, position, or endorsement of the U.S. Army, the DoD, or the U.S. government. All right, I am so excited to welcome Juliet Funt back on the podcast. We have a lot to talk about. Juliet, welcome back.
Thank you. We sure do, huh?
We do. So I guess it was probably about a year ago, you and I sat down. We talked about A Minute to Think, and of course we ran out of time on that one. But you were just starting, I believe, to work more and more with the military. And I'm so excited to get an update on what you're seeing as you work with the military, what you're learning, some themes. So just catch us up real quick. What have you been doing with the military, and what is jumping out at you? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's been an amazing year. We weren't even started. I was on a podcast after yours called From the Green Notebook, and that was the next level of exposure. And then a very high up CSM put my book number 1 on her reading list for 23. And that was kind of the beginning. So it's been a whirlwind of 9 months in terms of learning and onboarding new language, new acronyms, new ways of looking at everything. And we're working mostly right now with Air Force and Special Ops, although we're starting to have conversations with General Army. And it's so interesting because a very, very high up Air Force GO posted the other day that he's looking for ideas to help win back time. And that's what we are all about. In fact, that's the name of our workshops, is Win Back Time, because we don't see the military having the same intentionality when it comes to office and garrison work as they have in warfighting. So if we send someone to warfighting, they know every detail of every step of every micro motion that they will take, and that's drilled into them again and again and again and again. We don't do the same on the garrison side. And the story that I love to tell about this is when I was first learning Air Force, I was interviewing this poor airman who probably didn't know why I was asking him such pointed questions. I'm just a very curious person. And he at one point goes, "Ma'am, they don't teach us email." And I thought, that's it. We don't teach them email, meetings, decision-making, task management. We don't teach them anything. We just throw them into the work and say, it's probably logical. It's knowledge-based work. Figure it out. And that figure it out ending costs millions of hours in manpower, in human time, in overlap into family, in working on the weekends. It's that lack of intentionality that we believe is correctable. And so we've spent about 9 months developing new products and services, starting to work with many different groups and rolling out trainings, diagnostics, leadership programs. It's been very exciting.
Wow. And can you remind people, for those that maybe haven't listened to former podcasts or just familiar with your work, give us a little bit about your background. I mean, because you've been doing this work for decades. And that's one thing that gets me excited, because I hear this word task saturation thrown around, and I'm really glad that we're talking about that. And I can feel that. I can feel the problem.
Yes.
And I often reference you. I'm like, Juliet Funt, look her up. She's been doing this for decades. So we don't
25 years this year.
So tell us a little bit about just like how long you've been doing it and how this truly is your specialty.
Sure. I was a speaker consultant for the first 13 years, and we've had a company for 12. So it's 25 this year. And we've worked first in industry, many, many big brands, Nike, Sephora, Spotify, lots of big brands that would wow you if you're on the industry side. But we had never worked with military. And when we started crossing over, we were amazed to see that there were these giant areas of behavioral development that really had not been touched, where over on the corporate side, we had gotten in the industry side into many, many, so I wouldn't say easy routines, but predictable routines of how to create before and after measurable results in reducing wasteful work. We focus on the industry side a lot on overload as opposed to task saturation, which are two different things. Overload is more all-encompassing and would include things like emails and meeting time, where task saturation is usually considered a task list problem. So there's a slight differentiation there. But we're just trying to make work more sane and humane for people, so it doesn't have to feel so pressed and crazed and rushing through hallways all the time, so people can go home at night and be present with family without mentally doing work in their head while they're trying to have spaghetti and meatballs with their kids. And all of those values are very important to us. I would say secretly, between you and me in a friendly situation, it's all for me about the humanity part and the work efficacy and the more productive, and it's all great kind of extras. I just want people to be less miserable every day that they go to work.
And it's so interesting that you pinpointed, and I love, again, your outsider perspective coming into the military, looking at it and seeing it with fresh eyes with your experience. And you quickly pinpointed, we have a really nice playbook for war fighting, but when it comes to office work, we could use some help. You mentioned email. Let's go there first. Let's talk about communication, because we do try to communicate well. It's really important on the battlefield to communicate well. Maybe we don't do quite as good a job in the office work. What are some practical areas that you're seeing the military not do communication well? And what are some solutions that you could bring to formations?
So many. It's funny, we're just finishing the editing on a 16-hour training on this topic, so I'm trying to consolidate in my head.
Consolidate that, please.
Well, we're just writing. All right, well, let's begin with email. When I was doing an SLS for my first executive group, senior leader group in Air Force, I was asked the question, what is the biggest difference between industry and military as an advisor and helper? And the biggest difference is flat comms. Because flat communication has an ethos and a mission to be all-inclusive. So by its very nature, which is complementary and rather beautiful if you really study the history of it, it is all about wrapping your arms around every single person and knowing that a great idea could come from anywhere, and also everybody, by the way, should be aware of everything. But the reason it's different is it's the absolute polar opposite of any productivity or efficiency guideline that you would ever receive ever in the world of industry, because that's all about reducing distribution lists, CCing less people, stopping reply to all, making sure you only add the most important people in a meeting context, reducing attendance, which is in direct competition with flat comms. So we decided to do a flat comms white paper. We're interviewing a lot of people right now. We'll probably publish in November. If anyone in your audience has a good story of why flat comms has either annoyed them or served them on either side of the spectrum, we would love to have that story, and we'll get contact information at the end. But it's really interesting because it adds a huge amount of weight to the daily load of people, and yet can at times lead to transformational wins. And so how do we navigate this system? So one of the things we believe is important is actually teaching flat comms. Everyone says, in my first few months, I worked it out. I worked it out that 2 meant I was probably important, and CC meant I could probably just kind of move it aside. And sometimes I used it as a filing system, and sometimes I skimmed. But think about that 2, 3, 4, 5 month period where they're sort of swimming in it and not really sure what it means and overcompensating and overwriting. If you train them on day one, which is our premise, put it as part of in processing that there's a half an hour on flat comms. When do you skim? When do you read? When is it a filing system? What does to mean? What does CC mean? What are the implications of each of those fields? If you taught people from the beginning, could almost be a handout, but not really. You'd probably have to walk them through it. They would regain all that time that they're just experimenting and failing and being overloaded, and then eventually they get to a point where you go, oh yeah, and then I got it. So that would be one example. Another example we talk a lot about is that military professionals are always swimming in the sea of detail. And detail is so important to you for really important warfighting reasons. There's life-saving detail. There is critical detail that, if missed, could affect, so many people. And there's also rewarded detail where when you're a young person coming up in the military and you showcase a lot of detail, you show that you're good at detail, people go, I can trust that person. I want that person under my wing because I'm gonna really feel supported by their beautiful sense of detail. So they keep getting rewarded. And then there's some point in the trajectory where someone says, now think critically. And all they know how to do is generate detail. So there's this interesting pivot that I don't think we're preparing people for in the military. And I think so a conversation about detail starts to get really, really interesting. And what we teach people is to imagine you have a mental highlighter. And when we're teaching, we put up these examples of very large email with lots and lots of text, or these wonderful briefs that I wish I could screen share with you. You know, the briefs are like 700 words and it's all 7-point font. And you think, how did anyone think this was a slide, right? And you just start mentally highlighting and you imagine those fields of yellow appearing. And then you step back from the email or the brief and say, what percentage of what is on this paper is yellow? What percentage is actually important as opposed to filler language or overkill or things that could be in an appendix? And that helps us start to have a context for editing. Because when we're sending emails that have brevity and clarity, we're supporting the other person to not waste their time just wandering through this sea of words that we've given them. And so detail, I think in general, is a huge topic that we're noticing.
And when you talk about detail, you're talking about too many details in an email transaction or transmission? Is that one context where it's showing up?
In everything, yes. So in email, it tends to be sometimes too much detail, sometimes just too much verbiage. There's a lot of stream of consciousness writing where we just write as if we're talking instead of really thinking about it. A great way to correct that in email is if you think of, imagine you were emailing a 3-star, right? You would have that thing in your head that is bottom line up front and you make it really, really, really tight. We say make everybody a general, right? Just do that for the way that you write. You don't have to reserve that brevity and bottom line up front for a certain level of officer. Just write that way. And then if you find yourself restating or recapping or making a whole lot of content below that, just make sure it's intentional. We send lots of long emails because sometimes an email is a guide to work through a project or a very important sharing of information. But when we're mindlessly exchanging all that, it's a big problem. And then again, it shows up a lot in the sit reps and the reporting and the briefings and the slides. And it's just a place where people have a very high tolerance for many, 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 many words, but it's not efficient to read.
It's so interesting to hear you talking about flat comms as well. I've never been trained, as far as I can recall, on whenever I've been joining a new organization on how we want to do email. So it's really interesting. That seems fairly obvious when you really step back, but it's like, wow, that's a very practical thing that any leader could add to, like you said, their in processing. Just to be clear, I want to make sure I'm clear on what you're saying. I'm receiving it as flat comms is not completely bad, and you see it as there is a place for it and you can see the benefit for it, but we need to define from the beginning what flat comms is, what it's not, and we need to make sure that every member of the organization and team understands when to use it and when not to use it, because there is a waste of energy and time and attention when everything is flat comms.
Well, I mean, you added that piece about decide when to use it and not. I'm even saying that even if you use it all the time, let's say that we find the tool so valuable, this inclusiveness, and also so complimentary to say to every single person, we care, we want you on this thread. If that's going to be our default, then you need to teach people how to sift it when it's coming at them, because it's just overwhelming, the quantity. We had one of our diagnostics, we were interviewing a young man who said that he got 300 emails between 10 and 2 on an average day. That's not a manageable amount for someone to sift through, even if their only job was email, which it never is. So you just need to teach them systems. And there are so many areas where just bringing an extra lens of intentionality to the way that you're doing things can make all the difference. We went to, there's an Air Force base in California where we did one of our processes with senior leadership, and I know you have a lot of leaders here, called strategic choice. And that is about task saturation. And if you want, I can unpack for you more about what that's about. But in a 6-hour work session, they found 33 different things to either reduce, eliminate, or stop doing in their organization. That's not because I'm smart. It's not because our content is good. It's just smart people making a container, maybe with a little facilitation, to figure out, let's be intentional about where we are with task saturation and how do we start addressing it. And I step back and they find a lot of stuff on their own. They just need the permission, the intentionality, and then maybe a little bit of a kickstart.
I want to go to that, Juliet, but real quick, just to finish up email.
Oh, sure. I'm jumping.
One of my problems with email, and I guess I want to be really clear about what you think the problem is with email. One of my problems with email, just anecdotally, is I am not good at it. Like and part of it maybe is I'm trying to be present with other people. I'm trying to really focus on priorities. I'm trying not to let my email dictate my priorities for the day. Like that's one of my
very hard
principles, is like, I want to come into the day and I know what I need to get done by the end of today. And then I find if I live in my inbox, or if I spend too much time in my inbox, that distracts me. And then there's this frustrating feeling at the end of the day of like, oh man, those things that I knew were priorities didn't get done. So that's one problem that immediately comes to my mind. But is that a problem? A big problem?
That's a huge problem. I mean, I jumped into one of the problems, which is detail, but the way that email dominates our calendars is massive. And so let me rifle off a couple of tips that create a framework that can start helping people calm that. So first of all, I believe always in what we call a paper anchor. That is a piece of paper, not digital, sitting next to your computer. And in the morning, you write the 3 to 5 top things that you want to do in the day on the anchor. Why is it important that it's paper? Because it allows you to be driven forward to your next task without entering your digital world. And when you enter your digital world, you're going to go in 400 directions, right? This is like the most loving boss you've ever had is just going to keep driving you easily forward. The next piece of it then is interval checking, to figure out when in the day you are going to check email and when you're not, so that you have some containers. And then we learn to time block the places in between. So let's say you're going to check email. Let's say you don't really think you can take much time off of email. Let's say you're even going to check once an hour, which is a lot of checks. I'd prefer you're at 5 times a day. We say email diet. You should eat when you're feed your hunger for email at the same intervals as you'd feed your body, which might be breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and 2 snacks. So imagine like 9, 11, 1, 3, 5, something like that is a really nice interval, or 3 times a day. And then you have those checks, and you have the paper anchor to make sure you're doing those critical things so you can be proud at the end of the day. And then in between, you would use time blocking to figure out, when am I doing what? When do I want to do my email and when do I not? We want people to do email like laundry. Right now, it would be like if you went to the dryer and you got one sock out and then brought it to your room and then went back and then looked at 3 other pairs of pants and then decided not to fold them and then went back to your living room. You don't do laundry like that. You get the whole thing, you batch process it, and then you move to the next. And so if you think of kind of a laundry analogy, that may be very helpful. Another tool that you will like very much for your flat comms world is to create a CC and FYSA folder So anything that you're not in the two, you put it in that folder and you do an auto rule so it goes in there. And that folder you only have to check once a day because you're not in the two. So you'll see your inbox really shrink if you can do that. And not every military setting is a place where you can wait 24 hours to check an email. But for people who can, it's been a big tool.
Wow. And just imagine if every leader listening thought about some of those rules and put it in your unique context, because everyone's going to be just a little bit different.
Right.
But just having rules or training, or at least principles of like, hey, these are the ways that we want to do communication. That's super powerful. So let's go to task saturation. And I want to make sure we're defining it correctly, because you mentioned the distinction between task saturation and overload.
Yes.
One of the things, let me just quickly just give you my experience as someone in the military. You'll kind of have like a primary mission that you know is critical, that you know is like, hey, this is the core of what we do.
Right.
And then what often will happen is things will get added to your plate. Hey, do this, do this. Oh, hey, just take this quick phone call. Hey, okay, can you guys take on this extra training that we need to do? Or hey, can you guys go to the range? And all these are important. Well, I shouldn't say all. Many feel very important.
Right.
And then there's also this kind of subculture in the military where it's like, we do hard things. So I often struggle that if it feels hard, I can do it and I'm going to like really grin it and get it done. And sometimes hard means good. So just because there's a lot to do and it's really hard to get it done, does that mean something's wrong? And so I think sometimes it's really hard in the military, in my experience, to come to your leadership, even if you have great leadership, and say, hey, sir, ma'am, I feel like I have too much on my plate. Because what you're effectively saying is, I can't cut it. Like, I can't do hard things. I'm not a member of the team, or at least those are some of the narratives that go through my mind. So those are just a couple, maybe random, maybe connected thoughts. Tell us what I want to hear about that story of task saturation, but I think those are some of the things I've experienced when it comes to task saturation in the military. I'd love to hear your thoughts and that story that you were about to share on task saturation.
I wrote down that piece about if it feels hard, and that's a whole thread of the inner psychology that I haven't spent enough time with yet. That feeling of part of the way that I identify as a good teammate, as a strong person, is that I enjoy that feeling of it's getting hard.
Yeah.
I could do it and it's getting hard. And that certainly occurs in industry as well, but it's a different psychology in the military. You know, one of the things that we were writing, I said we were writing before just now, was the section for the military no, how to say no in the military. And what does it look like when your commander says, you know, I need you on the weekend and you already have a really important family thing planned, or what happens when your commander is saying, I think we should hire this person, and you feel really strongly against that person as being an asset to your team. It's a very delicate, unpackable topic in terms of that balance between what dedication looks like and smart business practices. I think that's a whole article to write there. But imagine if the person wasn't coming to the leader and saying, I can't handle this load. Imagine if the person was coming to the leader and saying, I see time that's being stolen from the mission, and I'd like to help you put it back where it's supposed to be.
Wow.
That's really the psychology, because it's all opportunity cost. It's not that you shouldn't be doing additional duties or this extra thing or this extra training. It's what are you not doing instead? And so if there are more readiness-related, mission-related activities that you're having trouble bringing your best self to because of task A, B, and C, that's when it really becomes a threat, not a threat to your machismo ability to just keep powering through, you know, male or female, the next thing, but opportunity cost. That's the conversation we really need to be having here is, yeah, I can do this. In exchange for what? In exchange for what other thing would I be spending my time on?
I love that. I think that's a really important framing, and it's a healthy framing, and it's good for the person and it's good for the organization. And it does require
leadership. I'll give you an example. Sorry. Yeah. I'll give you an example because leaders, if you ask leaders what they want to be doing, they want to be walking around and interacting with their soldiers. They want to be it's called managing by walking around. They want to ask questions. They want to be on the tarmac. They want to be in the places where their soldiers are and talking to them, or airmen. But if you ask them what they are doing, they're in the office signing papers. They're in the office having meetings. They're in the office making decisions. They yearn to be out. They yearn to be available. And that's a perfect example of opportunity cost. It's not that the meeting's not important. It's just that intentionality would challenge you to say which. The word which has to constantly be in our four brains. Which is more important?
How would you coach that leader? Because you have a lot of those leaders listening right now who are really want to prioritize the walking around, the leadership by walking around, the one-on-ones, the check-ins. They know that that's important. If you were to ask them, what is the most important thing you do on a day-to-day basis? I bet most of them would say that, but it's really hard and they're probably not doing what they know is most important. So where would you coach them to begin?
I think that military leaders are not aware how much low-hanging fruit is all around them in terms of reclaiming time. Because this may sound strange coming from me, but there's no stream of content yet that has become normative for you. So if you want to learn how to have a trusting organization, you guys are very familiar with speed of trust. That's where you get that. If you want to learn how to have a why-based organization, you go to the work of Cynic. You don't have a person or a body of work or anything that has really come in and said, let's look at time. How do you win back time for heroes? And that's what we're trying to evolve into, is a support for that unaddressed area. So if I was talking to that leader, I would say, here's the good news. The good news is there is so much low-hanging fruit in terms of wasted time. And the bad news is that you're in a system that makes it uniquely hard to fix it. Because if the leader said to me, I want to fix it, and they were going to be in their position for 5 years, I would say to them, not a big deal. I'll tell you how to do it. You do work at the blueprint level, the brick level, and the mortar level. What does that mean? Blueprints is the structure of the org. You don't have to worry about that in the DoD because that's handled for you. Bricks is all the stuff, projects, task lists, finance plan. Leaders can work on that and they can make changes. And mortar is human behavior that holds it all together. Do people know how to write? Do they know how to set a boundary? Can they make a decision? You can work on all of that over a 5-year time span and you can make huge changes. But you guys don't have 5 years. Because often I meet a leader and they have 1 year or they have 2 years or they have 6 months left. And it is that particular changeover structure that has got my creative mind working really hard to figure out how do those leaders solve this. Because if they had a longer runway, it's not complicated. It's not easy, but it's very straightforward, the kinds of changes that need to be done. It's how to do it with this changeover piece as part of the equation. That's really unique and very interesting.
Friend, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I want to take 1 minute to tell you about a product that I just created that I'm really proud of, and I think it can quickly help you get true clarity in life. In our 21st century social media comparison FOMO world, it's never been harder to cut through the noise and prioritize what matters most. But if you can get crystal clear about your deepest desires and how you want to spend your time, that clarity is a superpower in the world that we live in today. And that's why I created the Discover Your Core Values mini course. In this short on-demand course, I walk you through a proven process to help you discover your unique core values and how to make them practical for daily life. This course will make decision-making easier. It'll give you more courage, and it's going to help you have more peace as you say no to things that are not your highest contribution. If you're interested, you can get immediate access at calwalters.me/course. There you can purchase just the course, or for a very limited time, you can purchase the course and a one-on-one coaching session with me. This is a great way to invest in your future. I hope to see you in the course this week. Now back to the episode. Just for my own education, do you see that a lot in the private sector, the switching out every year, 2 years, or is that pretty uncommon? Okay.
No. I mean, sometimes if a CEO is bad, But if a CEO is good, they'll stay 10 years, you know, and the changeover. I was telling you, we're doing a couple white papers. I mentioned flat comms. I can't remember if we were recording yet. We're doing another one in the spring on leadership transitions. And in corporate, they might take 2 years, not always, but they might take 2 years to onboard the new guy. He meets with the old guy or gal. There's this huge effortful part of how you get somebody ready to take the handover. That's why we're so fascinated where your flips are much, have a little bit less structure to them. I know there's a great book that I've just started called The First 90 Days, which is helping the inbound leader to orient their transition. But we feel that that is leaving out 2 of the 3 groups that need to be optimized for transition: the incoming leader, the outgoing leader, and the staff. Because those are the 3 those are the 3 entities that are going to be affected. If you only teach the incoming leader how to do it better and no one else is being mindful or intentional, then they can't do it by themselves.
Can you talk to the incoming leader? I know So we're kind of recording this after in the military. Often the summer is that transition period,
right?
And let's say I'm a leader. I'm still in that first couple months. I really want to be careful. Task saturation, especially in the military, we're talking about it. So I know that that's a priority. It's a priority from the very top. So we're seeing that that's a problem. And I appreciate that we're acknowledging the problem. I think that's a great first step. What would you tell a fairly senior leader? Let's assume that you're talking to a fairly senior leader who has a pretty good amount of control over their organization. They just took over. How can they start from a solid footing on getting after task saturation?
Well, that leader's probably excited, and they probably have a billion things that they want to do with their new command. So first of all, we have to kind of get them to ease off the pedal a little bit, because the people that they are walking into are a staff and organization that already has a lot of stuff going on. So they're not open and empty scheduled and waiting for all the new goodies from the commander. And I think it's an easy thing for the commander or the leader to just kind of forget for a second that there's a whole ecosystem of tasks and deadlines that are already going on. One of the things that we're proposing in this paper is that the tasks of the staff be artificially paused or lessened for the first 4 weeks of every new leader. So imagine if you were able to pause or lessen tasks so the staff was kind of more open, kind of more in a ready stance of, hey, what you got? I think that that would be very inviting to new leadership, and then they could start picking up their tasks as that 4-week introductory period concluded. So that would be one thing to be aware of. The other thing that I would say is it's really important to know the difference between prioritization and reduction.
That's fascinating. Prioritization versus reduction. I've never heard that framing, but I want to hear more. Tell us the difference.
It's a big difference, because prioritization is I'm walking into a room with 10 things, and then I'm going to put them in the perfect order, and then I'm going to walk out with 10 things in the perfect order. Reduction is I walk into a room with 10 things and I come out with 6. And that's what we want. We want the surrender, dismissal, reduction, canceling, offloading of tasks to occur. And it keeps getting confused with this force ranking habit we have of just trying to keep getting them in the right order. So that day that I told you about when we do a strategic choice workshop, or leaders can do this by themselves, they don't need me. They're just sitting in a room really looking with slowness and intentionality at everything, and then starting to put it through different lenses. One of the lenses that we use is so wonderful. You just put a slide up that says, I wish we could stop doing blank. And you will watch a conference room full of leadership stumbling over themselves to get to their pads, and they're just writing and writing and writing and writing and writing, because you've unlocked something that's in their, like the next level back in their brain from the part that gets to be active every day. But they have a whole list. And then you have to separate them. So you have to sort them next to can't control, DOD, above my pay grade, not possible to change things, versus, yeah, I could have influence or control over this. And then you start digging in layer after layer. Another really good lens that you can play with is cadence. So if you look at all the stuff you do, reporting, meetings, get-togethers, conversations, where can daily become weekly? Where can weekly become monthly? Where can monthly become quarterly? So every time you open cadence and then you multiply that by all the months and years and people that are involved in that thing, you are lessening task load because you're opening up the cadence and saying, I don't really need a report every Friday on this. Maybe every month would be enough, or every quarter would be enough. So that's another lens. And we just keep going through that. There is a lot that can be won in these conversations. There's a lot that can be found. It just hasn't been it hasn't been a priority to spend that time.
I love that difference between prioritization and reduction, because we all default, at least in the military, it seems like we talk a lot about priorities. When we're doing that, we kind of think we're talking about reduction, but we're really not. We're often, just as you said, reordering. My question, Julia, is if I'm in that room and I'm trying to come up with a list, how do I avoid that feeling in my mind where it's like, I don't want to mention the thing that so-and-so came up with a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago, and I know it's really important to them, or I know it's really important even to the boss. Like, how dare I mention that thing that we've been doing for the last 6 months that, I just know that there are people's emotions attached to that task. How do we deal with that?
That's kind of bringing me back to this military no that we've been talking about, that sometimes in the military, no is no, and sometimes it's N period, O period. It's a necessary objection or a nuanced opinion or a new outlook. I think that leaders that I've been meeting say, please tell me the truth. I want to know, person who works with me, when something is off, because I'm alone in my own perspective. And if you don't tell me when something is off, how will I ever know? So I'm sure there are some leaders that you could get in a pinch if they have a different sort of ego setting than what I've just described. But a lot of the ones that I'm talking to, they are yearning for honest feedback from people.
Here's a question that kind of gets to the psychology, and it's like an assumption sometimes in the military that the person is not competent enough to handle it, or that they're not working hard enough. So it's like, I really kind of want to bring up that I feel like we're doing too much, but I don't want it to be viewed that I'm not working hard, that I'm not committed, or that I'm incompetent. And I know that's similar to what I asked before, but it's a slightly different emotion there, or take, or motivation. Like I'm worried that I'm not going to be viewed as working hard or competent. And then I also think leaders sometimes are suspicious of people on their team, because it's like, what do you mean you can't get all this done? Like, are you not putting in the time? Are you not? So there's that kind of, both from the junior member of the team worried about raising that for fear of thinking that I'm not working hard or not devoted. And then there's also some people in leadership positions who will make people feel that way. Their reaction is like, well, how much time are you putting in? Are you leaving too early? Are you coming in too late? Are you distracted by something else?
There was a leader that we had in the book who's, I can't even remember if the story made it into the book, but he used to come in very, very early in the morning. And one of the folks that I was interviewing was very proud that they got into the office at 7 a.m. and they thought they had estimable feelings about themselves that they went into the office at 7 a.m. But that boss was always in the corner office, and he would say, "Just sleep in," when the guy got there at 7 o'clock. So there are some interpersonal situations that you absolutely can't win. But I'll say a couple things in response. First of all, the scenario that I'm describing of really cutting what we would call bricks from the middle level is usually all senior people at the table. So they are at a place where their confidence and timidity balance is a little bit different from what you're describing. They don't really feel worried that someone's going to say that they are inefficient. They're just trying to move forward with more time for the mission. As you get down from there, I think it is a really intimidating thing. And that's why we like people to pair up with what we call a nobody and find a friend to discuss the thing that you would like to bring to leadership before you do so. And this idea of rehearsal seems a little awkward to people. Sometimes they feel like it's a little remedial. I'm an intelligent, authoritative person. Why can't I just go have a conversation? But it is precisely because the conversations are so difficult that you might want to have a nobody where you role play and practice and figure it out, and maybe even write out what it is that you want to say and try it. And then the nobody can say, you sound entitled, or you sound like a doormat, or that was too factual, or that was too emotional, or I can hear your frustration. Can you do it again calmer? And you can get to the point where you're ready to say something difficult to a senior person by indulging in this tool of rehearsal and also the camaraderie of that.
So you're suggesting, I grab a teammate and I kind of role play with them. Hey, these are the things that I want to bring up to our leadership. Here's how I want to do it. You act like that senior leader. And then after that experience, they give me feedback, and then I go approach my leader.
So you're ready. Yes, to get yourself ready, just the way of any good presenter gets themselves ready. A conversation like that is a teeny, teeny, tiny presentation, because you're presenting an idea that you feel is important, and you're presenting it in an environment that feels a little scary to you. And so why wouldn't you give yourself that extra preparation? And then on the leadership side, there's all sorts of coaching that can happen of how do you act in the first 3 seconds when an idea is spoken that doesn't really agree with your ego or desires. Because the moment that you habitually shut it down, you've now trained that person not to give you any honest feedback in the future. But if you can, and it's not always easy, but if you can remain curious and neutral and keep fact-finding and maintaining your neutrality and not taking it personally, you can learn more about what that soldier or airman or operator is needing, and you can learn more about what would serve your people.
I think this is a really special time in the military because you have leaders at the highest level acknowledging the task saturation problem. So I do think that gives even the most junior members a feeling of courage to say, okay, now's the time, because you're hearing that echoed at different levels of leadership.
But I just throw in, I was on the phone this morning with someone who was telling me about, let's just look at the simplest thing of we can't use cloud-based software, right? So there's no way to use traditional industry tools like, say, Asana, which would be a project management software.
Yeah.
You can't use Google Sheets to share spreadsheets. So now you're in an environment where before all this intentionality and surrender and teaching that we've been talking about the whole time, there are also very concrete brick problems, such as there is no smart and logical technical repository for all these tasks. So some people put them in emails, some people put them in spreadsheets, some people in the Air Force use something called TMT, but it's only spotty and not everyone can afford it. And so yes, there is a behavioral lens here, those mortar-based skills. There's also a brick problem here, which is more of a, let's go to the Pentagon and talk about what would the software be or the technology be that would allow people to have a place that is simple and organized, where tasks can be inputted, they can be given a due date and be seen by multiple people and be checked off as they are done. That's what every efficient business has a version of. And if you look at the way the military is doing it, unless I'm missing, and please folks, I'm on a huge learning curve, so tell me, write to me if I'm wrong, I don't think that there's a system out there to support people. And so once again, they have to kind of take a little duct tape and what, maybe if I put this hose and this thing and added some, like they're making up systems, and it's not as efficient or supportive as it can be. So task saturation is a volume issue, but it's also a processing issue because tasks aren't moving through fast enough. It's too many and also clumsy in the way that they are being played out.
So what I have noticed, this is just from the Army perspective, we have started using Microsoft Teams more.
Yes. Tell me how you use Teams for tasks.
I don't think we are, and this is, I'm just speaking for myself here. I need some training to get better at it because we use Outlook for, of course, for email, and we use Teams often for document sharing, for messaging. And I think we're still trying to figure out how do we best use Teams as a knowledge management platform, because we hang documents on there. We'll share documents through there. We'll use it as like a repository, like, hey, go check out the latest update. It'll be in this folder. And so I think we're slowly trying to understand Teams better and make sure we're maximizing its power. But at the same time, many organizations are still largely attached to a share drive. So like a large kind of network share drive where we hang documents. And so, and then of course we use other messaging based apps like Signal or just text message or what's the other one that WhatsApp, we use that a fair amount. So there'll be different types of communications that we use, but Teams is probably in the last year and a half, 2 years that we've fully adopted that. And I think we're still trying to figure out how to optimize the use of that.
Right. And I'm going to say an analogy that's I'm likely going to get in trouble, but I'll just give it a shot, is because I'm going to say it so badly. Let's say you had a bunch of different parts from a bunch of different guns, right? And they were in a pile. And the assignment was to go and assemble a weapon. You wouldn't just say, here's a bunch of different parts from a whole bunch of guns, assemble a weapon. You would say, do this, and then do this, and then do this. And it would be minute, and it would be practiced again and again. So it's back to that same analogy of the warfighting versus garrison intentionality. All the things that you said, I was taking notes, the Signal and Teams, and there are things probably we could craft a task management flow with those tools, but someone has to be the conductor. Mm-hmm. Someone has to say, we're going to try it this way. Because if every single person at every single desk is weird sciencing their own version of that flow, then you're not a cohesive team. And so Teams is a perfect example of a place where we think there should be more simple training. I don't think a lot of people even really know how to use Teams. And that's the only thing that they have. So just really simple things like, what's a channel and how do you tag people and what should it be used for? And that's a very, very good small example of where I think this is needed. This kind of conversation is needed.
And then you go back to transition. So what often happens is someone will be tasked with that responsibility, and we often just call it knowledge management. So, hey, we want you to figure out knowledge management for this particular organization that falls within this larger organization.
Right.
That person will start to come up with a plan. They start to train people. They start to implement it. And then it eventually will get rolled out. But then that person, of course, has to move or transition within a year or two.
Right.
And so it's up to the people that are left in the organization to continue that. So maybe if they've left a nice standard operating procedure or checklist, or maybe they've put the training in some kind of virtual platform where, hey, everybody watch this video so that you know how to do it and it's consistent. But I think we also fall victim to that same transition challenge as those people are trying to put these systems in place.
I think that's so true. You're giving me some ideas. So sometimes I would say to my team, do it like I was in a coma. And what that means is, like, if you can ask me anything, what would you do? And so that sense of imagining, if the current command team is thinking about, what could I do to set up something so that when the next command team comes in, it's so easy and it's so plug and play and it's so pre-installed that they wouldn't even have to worry about it. Wink, wink. That also means they might not disassemble it, and take away the good work that I did. It
might survive. Yeah.
Right. It might survive. So I think that's part of this transition mindset is I want to build things that are beautiful, simple, supportive, and easy, and that are just sitting in the system. And then maybe they have a chance of being continued. I think that that's the mindset. So imagining, what if I wasn't here anymore? How would this system be living on past me? Maybe that's a framing that command teams need to start with right from the beginning of planning anything, because of the way that you guys flip out.
I'm amazed at what you've identified, even in the short time that you've been doing this work. It's so neat as someone who's been in this organization for over 16 years to see the insights that you bring. I mean, it's clear to me that you've been doing this for decades, and how even Juliet, you've done a great job of learning about the military too. I'm impressed with how quick of a study you are.
I've been spending a lot of time with the military.
Well, thank you. Genuinely, thank you. It's some really important work, and obviously the mission of the military is extremely important. So I'm really glad that you're helping us see ourselves and helping us get better. We only have a few minutes left. I guess my final topic / question is, I'd love for you just to speak briefly on how leaders should approach time away, because I do think that's really important. Going back to the human element, I know that that's so important for you. Talk to leaders a little bit about just how they should think about time away, their people's time away. And then in the last minute we have, we'll talk a little bit about how people can connect with you and your team.
So real quickly, I'll give you 3. People always want more tippy-tooly hacky things. So let's do 3 really great tippy-tooly hacks for the productivity lens before we move to vacation, because I think it's so important. So here's my current favorite 3. Number 1, asynchronous communication. I have a 4-star who is in love with this process now and helping me make it popular. Async just means instead of having a meeting, you just trade asynchronous communications, meaning I could take my iPhone and I could record a little, hey, I just wanted to let you know about ba, and I send it to the leader, and then the leader goes, well, here's what I think about that, and they send it back. If you trade 3 or 4 or even 5 volleys of 1.5 minutes of async, you're still down about 40 minutes from the meeting that you would have had together to exchange that information. And you can even do it with groups. So that's number 1. Number 2, I love calendar as to-do list. And this has completely changed the way that I work in the last year. Instead of a to-do list, you will need time to do each of those to-dos. So going to the calendar, grabbing the time and blocking it for that to-do serves then as the to-do list. And those blocks can be easily moved forward if you don't get to something. So that's one of my favorites. And then fixed time productivity by Cal Newport, which is not always possible in a military context, but it's basically saying, I'm going to give myself a certain number of hours to work today. We say sometimes Dolly Parton hours. So let's say you want to work 9 to 5, and that's your block, and that you're going to structure your productivity to fit within that block, as opposed to just working and seeing how long you worked. And it's a subtle difference, but it makes a huge difference. So I want to give them a few things just to play with, because everybody enjoys those specifics. And then I'm delighted to talk a little bit about leave.
Can I ask a question on the asynchronous communication? Is that like a audio text or like a voice text that I'm sending, and then they're free to listen to it whenever's convenient? And then
Correct.
I send
That's why it's asynchronous, right? Because we don't have to be in the same room together. In the industry world, we would use Loom, which is a cloud-based video software where you can also share your screen when you're doing that. I don't believe you have access to that. But anything where you can record. Also, what's really nice is in this very lonely post-COVID world, you get to hear each other's voices instead of just moving everything into an email. I think that has a lovely humanistic undercoating to it from the technique that I really like.
I love that. I've got me and a few of my best friends, we use Voxer. Have you ever used Voxer?
Oh, yes. Similar.
And it's amazing how well we're able to keep in touch, but we're able to listen to the messages and send the messages at a convenient time, which is really convenient. So yeah, tell us a little bit about, I know we've only got about a minute left. Tell us a little bit about
vacation.
leave and then how to connect.
I love leave. So for a hardworking lady, I really like vacation more than anything else. And I will say that I am such an advocate of people taking real leave. And what I mean by that, my personal enormous bias, is that being digitally disconnected. Now, it's very scary. Most people have an autoresponder that says, I'm on leave, so my responses will be a little bit slower. They don't have autoresponders that say, I'm on leave and I'll write you when I get back. But I would love to think that we are championing a movement to take people in that direction. And there's 2 unlocks that make it feel a little bit more possible for people. So the first unlock is that disconnection and unavailability are 2 different things. I just took 4.5 weeks off work in the summer, and I was completely disconnected. I never looked at email, and I never went on social media. But I was not unavailable, because 2 times during that month, my team had to call me. And they picked up the phone, and they dialed my number, and they called me, and I talked to them for 2 minutes. Didn't ruin my time, didn't really bring me back all the way into the world of work as I would have been if I'd opened up the dreaded inbox. But I was not unavailable. And so when you remember that you have a telephone that also rings, in addition to all the other wonderful things that it can do, you give yourself a little bit of a safety net. Also, by the way, they probably won't call, because calling is so hard, especially if you're the leader. They probably won't call you. They'll probably figure it out, but you're not unavailable. The other tool that makes it really easy is called a re-entry day. This is just bringing that same lens of intentionality to the day that you return. Way before you go on leave, you block all the hours of that day with re-entry activities, and you extend your autoresponder into that day. So if you're going to come home on a Sunday, that means Monday your autoresponder is still on, and you are purposely catching up with no other interpersonal distractions. You have a 4-hour block for email. You have a 1-hour block for tasks. You have a 1-hour meeting with your directs. You have a 1-hour meeting with your backup, and then you've done your day. And you have at least 1, sometimes 2 days where you re-assimilate into the world of work, and you work through that pile of things that will be there waiting for you, as opposed to feeling like, oh, if I go in the hotel lobby and I just check in for 30 minutes before the kids wake up, that probably won't hurt anything. I don't agree. I think vacation is like driving from New York to LA, and doing that behavior is like turning around every night to go drive back to New York to make sure that it doesn't need you. You never get to the new place, the new perspective, the real feeling of departure that leave is supposed to give you. So I've been even thinking of writing my next book on this. I am so passionate about people doing vacation better that that's what I've been thinking about.
I love it. Thank you for helping us do the important things, and also just being more human. Because
thank you.
No, I just think that anyone, I mean, I've recently, been to some funerals, and it's amazing how that makes you just think about life and what's important and I do think it's really important that we be able to enjoy that time off, and that our people be able to enjoy that time off. So please write the book. So Juliet, I think people from this conversation and from previous conversations get the sense that you've got a lot to offer. You also, I love that now you're in the context of the military, you're helping people, and your work is spreading like crazy, and that makes me really excited. Tell people where to connect with you if they have questions, if they have thoughts, or just want to follow what you're doing. How can people do that?
Yeah, if we can serve in any way, in professional development needs, we'd love that, but also just to stay in touch. Best thing is to follow me on LinkedIn if you want to be in touch personally. And then you can reach us at theefficientteam.com.
Perfect. All right, Juliet. Well, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And well, hey, thanks friends for sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Juliet Funt. Every time she comes on the show, I really enjoy hearing about how we can make work more productive, because you're right. Often, or she's right, often we lack a framework, or we lack a resource for how to actually get after the problem of overload, of task saturation. And she's just such a wonderful resource for that. Just a reminder, if you want to work with her, if you want to learn more about her work, you can go to theefficientteam.com, and there's a place where you can fill in a form to learn more about the work that she does. If you enjoyed this episode, one way you can really help me is go to Spotify or Apple and leave a rating or review. That makes a big difference. And because you were here till the end, shoot me an email at cal@calwalters.me and let me know you got to the end of the interview with Juliet Funt. And for a few of you, I'm going to send you a copy of her book, A Minute to Think, just as thanks for listening to this podcast, for tuning in till the end, for investing in your leadership, and really for making our world better. Because if you're someone who invests in your growth, then I know you are inspiring other people and making all the spheres of influence that you have better. This episode might be one that I come back to and just share some individual reflections, because this one meant a lot to me. There were just so many little nuggets she dropped that were awesome. So I hope you go and have a great week. Share this with someone if you enjoyed it. And remember that life is short. Let's go make it count.